Well, good afternoon. Welcome. Welcome. If I can grab your attention just for the next 45 minutes or so, I would greatly appreciate that. And welcome to what has become the most interesting session of the day. And who knew that it was going to be that? But what I thought we would do, first of all, my name's Nathan Cooper. I'm Alberta's senior representative to the United States. I oversee all of Alberta's U.S. engagement. That includes our office in USA West in Seattle, just down the road from the Penwar head office, and our office in Chicago, Illinois, in Dallas, Texas, and I am based in our Washington, D.C. office, which is co-located in the Canadian Embassy. So it's a great pleasure and honor to be here with you. And I'm the former Speaker of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. And so I'm largely a recovering politician. So it's great opportunity to be able to speak with you. And in order to limit my time in speaking, I brought 6 of my closest friends. And so what we're going to do is just a very brief sort of age, location, details, coordinates, sort of, and by age, I'm just kidding, introduction, and then we'll provide our panelists an opportunity to provide some overview on trade, and in particular, how it impacts their region or jurisdiction, and the tie-in to Penwar. And then we'll go ahead and take a number of questions, and I have some questions as well. So Dan's going to introduce himself first. We're going to work our way that way, and then Paul will open with his remarks, and we'll get right stuck into it. Go ahead, Dan.
Dan Ujczo, running back, the Ohio State University Buckeyes. That was always my dream. Dan Ujczo, Associate General Counsel, Cenovus Energy.
Jason Hale. I'm 28. I'm a recovering politician as well. No, actually, I'm a little older than 28, but I am the Deputy Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation for the province of Alberta.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Holland. I'm the Global Trade Counsel for the Simplot Company out of Boise, Idaho.
Brock Mulligan, Senior Vice President with Alberta Forest Products Association, based here in Edmonton, and I'm 41.
I'm Parm Bains. I'm the Member of Parliament from Richmond East Steveston, and I sit on the Select Standing Committee for Industry and Technology.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Choi, MLA for Burnaby South Metrotown in British Columbia, and also Parliamentary Secretary for Trade. And since I'm going to be doing the open air, I think I can continue on. And thank everyone to Penwar for bringing together government and industry leaders from across Northwest as well. And I also like to acknowledge my fellow panelists and thank them for joining us today. Great to see MP Parm Bains here as well from BC. And a panel like this to me is really important because they bring together the people and organizations that help shape the future of trade in our region. The insights shared by today's panelists will absolutely help us understand what is needed to strengthen trade opportunities and ensure our region remains competitive. And I think that's something we heard throughout the morning as well. Through Penwar, BC works alongside US states, Canadian provinces to advance collaboration, as we can see, and economic development from trade, infrastructure, energy, tourism, and environment, of course. And it's a model, in my mind, of how cross-border cooperation delivers real economic outcome for all the regions. Now, we're meeting at a time of real change in the world. I mean, it doesn't get as recent as a few minutes ago, as we know. Shifting supply chains and rising costs due to global instability. In this kind of environment, trusted partners matter more than ever. As BC's Parliament Secretary for Trade, my role is to help BC expand to international partnership, diversify trade, and make sure BC businesses have the support they need to compete globally. And we're focused on maintaining a strong relationship with our key trading partners. Of course, CUSMA, USMCA remains the foundation of our North American trading relationship. Here in Canada, we are focused on reducing interprovincial trade barriers and supporting business to reach new markets, to create one national economy within our own borders. So BC brought together all 13 provinces, territories, and federal government in unprecedented collaboration as we approved the Canadian Mutual Recognition Agreement on goods few months ago. And this agreement essentially means that goods tested and certified to be sold in one province or territory can be sold in another province or territory. It's a simple concept, but it's a game changer for Canadian economy. But it took a lot of work, and I want to recognize all Canadian colleagues who are here for their role in each of them played in getting this agreement signed and their continued work towards full implementation of the agreement. Now in BC, we're building on this momentum, and like many other provinces are doing, we passed the Trade Recognition Act unanimously, which implements the Mutual Recognition Agreement and gives us a framework to expand mutual recognition and tear down more internal trade barriers as negotiations continue with other jurisdictions. And it's one more piece that will make it easier for business to expand across Canada and attract investments into the province. We're also working to strengthen supply chain resilience and infrastructure that supports trade as well. So we are Canada's only province on Pacific, and that's a great point of pride, as well as a great responsibility. We take it as that. So there's been a lot of discussion here from my Western Canadian colleagues about being landlocked. Of course, we want to build a strong Canadian or Pacific Northwestern economy. So we want to be in a place that benefits every community. So recently, we reached a major agreement with federal government that helps unlock major investments in infrastructure, clean energy, and workforce development, while our Look West strategy is strengthening BC's role as Canada's Pacific gateway and creating new opportunities for businesses. Now, these investments and reforms help create the condition business need to grow and succeed across province and region, and by working together collaboratively across borders and across sectors, and by working together in good faith. I think that's really important. On our many points of agreements and mutual benefits, we can build a stronger and resilient future for businesses throughout Pacific Northwest. So I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists as well about the challenges and opportunities we have and what government and industry can do together to strengthen trade and build a more resilient economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I'll just build on what Secretary Choi has talked a little bit about. I mentioned that I'm from Richmond East, Steveston in Richmond, British Columbia. And it is a region, or the city itself is very integral to a lot of the logistics. It's a logistics hub. And last week, we talked a little bit, we heard from panelists earlier in the day today about the importance of trade. And I think if we look at the resilience that we're talking about, a lot of the work that Pacific Northwest Economic Region and the people that are talking about it here, we're going to hear, again, I look forward to talking a little bit more about the questions that'll come up. And I don't want to repeat everything that was just said with respect to the work that we are doing on breaking internal trade barriers, becoming more resilient. And there's no doubt that we all know Prime Minister Mark Carney's talked a lot about growing non-US global exports. And how are we going to do that? What are the things that we are going to do? We need to, reduce choke points, supply chain corridor, and that resilience has to go both ways. It has to go not only east and west, but again, we need to continue to look at the choke points that we have between the two countries as well. And really, the bottom line, the future competitiveness of Canada-US trade, we believe will depend less on just the tariff reductions, but the regulatory alignment, the efficiencies in our borders, and the resilient supply chains, the workforce availability, and the investment capacity that we can increase with new partnerships and agreements, and many that we heard about in previous panels today, outside of just the U.S. and Canada trade, but the other nations that we can build more relationships with. And I talked a little, I had an opportunity to visit the U.S., not only in the Penwer roundtables that they've been organizing in Washington State, but also in Washington, D.C. And I had opportunities to talk with representatives from both Republican and Democratic sides. And I talked a lot about how the business that we can do, we can grow together. And many of the things the actions that are being taken are very counterproductive. And we have a lot to offer both nations and work together to grow and become, economic superpowers jointly and not just singularly. So I'll leave my comments there, and I look forward to having more discussion and talking about more details as the discussion goes. Thank you for having me here today.
Thanks. Well, I get to talk about lumber and forest products, which are like a difficult conversation at the best of times. Y'all saw the ambassador this morning. You wanted nothing to do with it. It's a tough conversation. I'd contemplated a couple of approaches to the tough conversation. One was to grab about 6 of those shots of whiskey from this morning. That's one way to make getting tariffed to death and losing your market share to the Europeans feel good. I'd also contemplated just being the curmudgeon of this panel and looming over you with my dark presence.
Which one have you gone for?
No, but I picked the third way, the constructive high road approach, which is to talk about the value proposition that we have, and I think it's pretty clear. So, and I'll do that by tracing our value chain. So you start with a log in the bush. It gets harvested with usually either a John Deere or Caterpillar equipment, both made in Illinois. It gets loaded onto a Kenworth or Western Star truck, which are both made on the west coast of the U.S. or in the Midwest. It gets sent to a sawmill and processed with USNR equipment, which is in Woodland, Washington. In that part of Washington, it's almost Portland, but it's not quite. The residuals from it get sent to a pulp mill here in Canada, and then they get made into pulp, and that pulp gets shipped to the U.S., where not only does it gets value added, a bunch of it gets sold back to us here in Canada, a bunch of it gets consumed in the U.S., and some gets sold overseas. Contrast that with what we're seeing now. We're losing the market share to the Europeans, and they log with Finnish equipment and Swedish equipment. They load it on a Volvo or a Mercedes. They sell that lumber still to the U.S. consumer, but at a much higher price. And then they use the residuals to feed a pulp mill that competes against the U.S. pulp mill. And so this, as an industry right now, we're under 40. Well, I mean, who the heck knows what we're under? But before this, we were under 45% combined duty and tariff. It doesn't make a lot of sense to us when we look at what we think are U.S. policy objectives to build their industrial base. Well, this definitely underpins that. To promote affordability for the consumer, well, to get something out of Sweden or Germany costs you more. There's just no doubt about that. And lastly, and we've seen this one come up in the last few days to prevent everybody from sucking on fire smoke all summer long. Well, the way that you prevent and you manage your forests is to turn it into products that we all use. And so right now, we're all paying for the American consumer is paying for the Finns and Swedes to do that. And that just doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense to us. So that's kind of where the file is right now. And yeah, interested to see where it goes from after today's announcement.
Just before Adam brings his opening remarks, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you're in the app and you have a question, we're going to take a bunch of them from folks around the tables. So please feel free to jump on the app and put your question in there, and I'll deliver it on your behalf. Adam.
President Donald J. Trump is the greatest president in the history of the United States for trade attorneys and consultants. So anyway, it's good for somebody at least, right? So yeah, otherwise people wouldn't have questions about like, what is a 338 tariff, right? Because of course this is a new one, right? We went through 301, 232, I'll apply to softwood lumber. You had the Section 180s that came out. There was a gap before. Now we're going to run into 301 tariffs that you'll see pop out here at the end of the month against basically the whole world. So anyway, this is a new one that President Trump did today against Canada, and the reason for that is because Canada's plan right now is just to wait out President Trump and wait out the rest of his presidency. They know, Ottawa knows that President Trump cannot go and withdraw from the USMCA unilaterally. It has to be done by the US Congress. And so because of that, President Trump is going to be going and increasing pressure over time to go and to try to bring Canadian representatives to the table. So anyway, that's just, that's a question that I've gotten a lot already today, and that's the answer to that. So that's the reason for, and that's why we saw that happen today, and that's why we're going to see that pressure continue to mount. But just for me, I'm a trade attorney. I'm also a U.S. licensed customs broker. I've worked in this area exclusively for my entire career. And I'm very grateful to work for a company called Simplot, JR Simplot company out of Boise, Idaho. We make a lot of the French fries that you eat at McDonald's and at Wendy's and Arby's and Outback Steakhouse and others. We also make a lot of the fertilizer that is used to grow the potatoes and other crops up here in Canada, and primarily the western half of Canada as well. And so, we do a lot of business at the border. I counted it up. I looked at our trade data. We do about $700 million worth of goods flowing across the border. Just one company, right? You can imagine, just multiply that across the entire economies of the United States and Canada that rely on each other. And this is one very, very integrated economy, right? And so when you go and you see the president go and throw tariffs on this, it creates a huge gridlock. It creates problems, and it creates challenges. And this is one of the topics why we're here today, at Penwar discussing these topics. And so by us going in what I'm hoping is that through Penwar and through other organizations that are meeting here, so we can find solutions. We can find ways that we can give President Trump that win while still giving Canada a win as well. And so that's where I hope the direction goes with this.
Well, thank you. And I guess, before I was the Deputy Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation, I am a rancher. My family, we're fourth generation ranchers from southeastern Alberta, and we irrigate. So I'm very honored to be the Deputy Minister of Agriculture and Irrigation, something that we've been involved with a lot. And over the past few years, and specifically this past year, I've had the opportunity to go to the State Agri Leaders Conference down in New Orleans in January, and then in February I was at the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture in Washington, D.C., meeting with stakeholders, meeting with other state ag secretaries, state ag leaders from all over the United States. And there was a number of provincial representatives down there too from the provinces. And I think I didn't hear one conversation was, yeah, these tariffs are great. We got to slow down the trade. You guys, it was overwhelming how much we rely on each other. And to hear the other state commissioners and secretaries and their policy people actually, talk about that and state that, like, yes, we do need Canada. We need the products. You need our products, and that integration of the supply is so critical. And I'll boast a little bit about Alberta. We're the number one beef province in Canada. We have just under 5 billion head of cattle in the province, and just about more cattle than people. We process 70% of that beef is in the province, and we feed about 70% of the Canadian feeding sector in the province. So we rely on export. We rely on our partners. Actually, when we can't fulfill, the slaughter capacity in the province, we import cattle. So last year in 25, we imported about $400 million worth of live cattle, and we exported about $400 million worth of live cattle. Our total ag exports into the U.S. was $4 billion. So it's big business, and I always look at it, when I'm speaking to different groups, it's a marketing tool. We are so close. My ranch is 4 hours from here. My ranch is 4 hours from Great Falls, Montana. So there's just that border. It's close, and there's a lot of our cattle that head down to Washington, to Pasco, Washington, to Hiram, Utah, to fill their plants. Our grains, there's grain going back and forth. There's hay going back and forth, depending on the climate conditions. If there's a drought in northwestern US, then we're shipping hay down there. If there's drought in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC, we're shipping hay up here. So it's that ease of trade of commerce that helps us continue to build the sector. And that's what ultimately what we're trying to do within Canada and the US. We want to build the sector. We know that we're losing huge amounts of farmland every day. So we have to do more with what we have. And that's kind of where we've taken the position in Alberta on irrigation. We know we're going to have to continue to export more products. So we're going to have to produce more. And how do you produce more on less land and to get that that ability to ensure our processors, whether it's any kind of value-added processing in Canada, in our province, we have to be able to ensure that there's going to be that supply there. So that's why we as a province have taken a big stance on promoting irrigation, putting millions of dollars into irrigation to try to help on the bigger picture. But I think we're going to talk more about specifics as we go along. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, I talked a lot in the earlier session, and then of course we had this 50% tariff announced across 3 sectors, which I agree with all of the earlier comments about why this came around. This is what we've all been warning about. This foot dragging, rag the puck strategy. With each passing day, something else will become an irritant, whether it's a bridge, whether it's air quality, or whether it's, pick the issues we've just had. Dairy, we've been fighting about forever. It's frankly more of a red herring. We can talk more about that later. But on the automotive side, because Canada retaliated against the US for the auto tariffs. And you've heard Ambassador Ujczo say it. You've heard all members of the US administration. There's 2 countries that retaliated against the United States for tariffs, and they both started with the letter C. The People's Republic with China and Canada. And so in the White House, those 2 countries have been grouped together. And I mean, here we sit today. Canada has just been hit with tariffs in the auto industry because the US views the Canadian auto industry as unfair, and Mexico was left alone. Keep that in perspective for a moment. The US right now views the Mexican auto industry as more balanced in trade than the Canadian auto industry. There's no objective facts that bear that out, but it's been the tone and tenor of the conversation and created in some part on this side of the border as well. And we have to acknowledge that, right? This strategy ain't working. Let's be humble. We can dig into it a little bit, but how do we get out of this situation that we're in today? First is, as was said earlier, these tariffs don't come into effect for a month. Whenever you see that, that's a leverage move by this administration. So they're giving everybody white space. The only thing I do disagree, I do think there's a reasonable debate whether the president can withdraw from USMCA with 6-month notice with or without Congress. But this was what we were telling everybody else could happen, is you don't need to withdraw from USMCA. You need to pull the USMCA exemption from tariffs. And that's exactly what they did today. The media is reporting this as 50% tariffs on alcohol and cement and hockey sticks. If you open up that auto list, as we did right before we walked in here, subject to further review, it's a lot of auto parts, all industrial machinery, all semiconductors, a lot of clothing is in there. There's a lot of words that folks may not at first blush understand, but it's like paper at boom, 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 6 centimeters, bye-bye. That's labels, because there's a huge cross-border label industry that happens. So there is not a doubt in my mind the United States ran the algorithm and is looking at the products that are traded the most across the border and has identified those and pulled the USMCA exemption. We talked about this. This is the USMCA squeeze. Give us what we want, or we're going to have tariffs on you. But on the good news side, for all of us sitting in Alberta today, energy continues to be exempted. For our great friends from Saskatchewan, Travis is here, our great president of Penware, potash is exempted. So when the president says there's certain aerospace and aviation products continue to be exempted, the president should get Boeing Salesman of the Year, by the way. In all of our trade deals, he's selling like 80, 90 Boeing planes with everybody, right? He's been selling planes left and right at what hasn't been exactly the greatest time for that company. So we're in a situation right now that we have to maybe spend some of this discussion talking about where do we go from here? Because the squeeze was just put on. What we've been warning about, that there's going to be a day where you get the USMCA exemption pulled off of products. It's right now. And that's why I said in the earlier panel, USMCA ain't going to be a year down the road. It's in the fall. Now, I also did that. So I said, bring me back next year because I'm trying to get the invite to the Idaho session. By the way, I mean, I'm Brandon, I'm fishing over here, buddy. But that's, you know, so I think it's very important to understand what just happened today. It's leverage pulling the USMCA exemption. So all of a sudden, there are a lot of Canadian products that are going to be crossing the border in a month at 50% tariffs, which means they will not be crossing the border.
Excellent. Thanks, guys, and appreciate your opening remarks. Now, I have a bunch of questions that I find interesting, but they may or may not be interesting to you. And so if you have a question that you find interesting, please feel free to send it my way, and we will prioritize those questions over the things that I find interesting to try to meet the needs of those who have taken time out of their day to join us. And so I want to build on some of the things that Dan was saying, and then perhaps Adam and maybe others on the panel. Feel free to indicate your desire to answer the question. But the first question is, and Dan touched on it briefly, about the tariffs that President Trump just put on the Canadian economy, or certain sectors of the Canadian economy. And maybe Adam will speak to the breadth of those, because at first glance it seems narrow, but it's actually a bit broader. So if you want to speak to that, Adam. And then the other question is, and I think this is the important part, the second part of the question that's important, that order is effective in 30 days. And how do we remain productive and work on agreements through this sort of noise and otherwise? What should we use those 30 days for, I think, is the heart of the question. But if you want to speak to a couple of those things, and then I don't know who else has a desire to take a crack at it.
Yeah, sure. So there were 3 executive orders signed today. The first one is in Section 338. Again, this is the first time that President Trump has used this section. Has to do with unfair trade treatment of U.S. products. And the first one is alcohol, second one is automobiles, and the third one is dairy, right? And so, of course, I've read in the news about trying to stay away from American alcohol, for example. So that's kind of and then also the other dairy and automobiles are other 2 big, of course, sticking points that have come up. That have come up through the USMCA renegotiations. But of course, the reason for bringing those up now is to go into to create additional pressure to go into try to as the USMCA negotiations come up, for them to put additional pressure on the Canadian negotiators. But as far as the types of products that these new 50% tariffs are going to be applied to, there's a huge laundry list. So each one of those executive orders has its own annex. And so if you get on Google, you search for those executive orders, they'll be posted on the White House website before long. You'll see at the bottom of each one of the orders, there's an annex, and it lists out a tariff classifications for each one of those. And there's literally hundreds of different types of items. Americans, watch out. There's hockey sticks and hockey equipment have been applied to. And so
I feel like that might be targeted.
Yeah, exactly. So, but there's softwood lumber that this hits on as well. There's alcohol is another big area that was hit as well. But anyway, that's kind of where this geopolitical kind of game is going. Not at all. No, so for Simplot, just to add to your comments earlier, so Simplot, we ship fertilizer, a lot of fertilizer from the phosphate fertilizer from the United States to Canada, where it is used to grow crops. And then once those crops, including potatoes, are grown, we go and we turn them into French fries. We have a very large plant in Manitoba, and then that plant produces all those French fries and then ships them back down to the United States across the eastern seaboard primarily. And so if the next time that you're visiting Washington, D.C. or New York and you go to McDonald's, there's a good chance that you're eating a Canadian French fry, right? So, I mean, that just shows, even just for our one company, just how integrated the economy is. But potatoes were not covered French fries were not covered, and potash and coming south from Canada was not covered. That's important for us because the United States doesn't create potash. We rely on that, while Canada also doesn't create phosphate fertilizers. So it really is truly, when we're talking about growing crops, the two countries are very much intertwined, and that's one of the reasons why you'll see that potash was exempted from that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's excellent. Is 30 days, is there anything that from your perspective and perhaps Dan or whoever, that could change the president's mind in 30 days or less? Or should we throw up our hands and accept what's coming to us? Or what should be our position, would you say?
So I think others will have some good comments on that as well. But the challenge here is that some of these things are big sticking points. The softwood lumber has been a sticky point. The dairy industry has been a sticking point for years and years and maybe even decades. So going and trying to find a solution is going to be within 30 days is maybe a challenge. I do think that there are opportunities. I think that there are things that the United States wants from Canada that Canada also wants from the United States that you could implement. So critical minerals, for example, fertilizers falls into that category too. But critical minerals, of course, China uses its non-market economy to go and to put anybody out of business. For any critical mineral producers out of business, the second that they really start getting on their feet, they have that capacity because of all of the government-owned all the government subsidies that they receive. And so by going in the United States and Canada working together on that, they can go and create a more resilient supply chain for critical minerals within North America. So that oil, for example, Canada may want to go into to increase access of its energy industry into the United States. There may be pipelines that could be built and other things like that. Of course, I'm just kind of spitballing here, but you can kind of see there may be things that Canada can ask for, so that of course. The point is that I think Canada and private industry generally want all of this to go away, right? We want stability. Businesses, the private sector, they want stability. They want predictability. That's how we can prepare for the future. We can prepare for risk, and we can get through it, right? And so the question is, how can Canada and the United States come together and try to address some of these very challenging things that have been on the table for years and years and years? And I'm not sure if 30 days is going to do it, but this is certainly the time.
We
I
should
think
try.
Yeah, and I think 30 days is all. The fact that it's not 7, the fact that it's not 10 which has been kind of the practice when they really want to put the tariffs on. 30 days is a signal that this is get to the table and negotiate. You're much more eloquent than I am. I would just say my advice is to do the George Costanza. And I'm not talking about say a great line and walk out. I'm saying do the exact opposite of what you've been doing to date. And this is going to be the hardest thing for every elected official in this room to do, particularly on the Canadian side of border. Don't react to this. It's an invitation to negotiate. And and I would pull every microphone in the world away from Premier Ford. If I could give any piece of advice, he's out there this morning talking about send water bombers in. Don't tell Donald Trump to send a bomber. Well, anything with the word bomber in it anywhere. Okay.
Do you think there's any causation about the premier being out on CNN at some length over the last 2 days?
I think it just keeps coming. Like the hits keep coming. And the fact is there was a great deal of positive momentum in June. The prime minister gave the speech in New York because the U.S. position was, you guys have retaliated against us. Nathan, you were with us. We were meeting with USTR Greer and others. And he basically said, look, I'm going to have a tough time selling a deal with Canada. But it was basically show some willingness to come to the table. And again, I'm not justifying the Trump administration's negotiating tactics. It just is what it is. They negotiate with maximum leverage. It's Michael Corleone settling all the family's business. That's how they roll. You have to understand that's what they do. And they have the leverage, the largest consumer market in the world, right? I mean, and every country now has come to the table to cut a deal based on the power of the U.S. consumer. We are the consumer of last resort. Now, how strong is the U.S. consumer? I think the reasonable minds may disagree on that. I know when I go grocery shopping, I'm like, damn, this has got expensive, right? And I dominate self-checkout, by the way. I dominate self-checkout. But all of that, I don't want to go on and on here other than to say what other countries have done is came to the table. You know, in the Asia Pacific region, the Japanese, the Koreans, they didn't lose their hair. They didn't issue a bunch of press releases. They said, here's our deal. Here's our negotiating. The one challenge Canada and Mexico have is the other deals with other countries aren't completely done yet. And so Canada can't put itself in a worse position vis-a-vis everybody else. But we just eloquently laid out the list. It's steel and aluminum tariffs. There's going to be a quota on how much steel is coming from Canada, how much is coming from Mexico, and probably a tariff within the quota. Negotiate it so if everybody else has a tariff, ours has to be lower, right? As Canada and Mexico. Like that should be, and we'll pick 10% today, but let's not get, philosophical and say no tariffs at all, because there's going to be a tariff within that quota. And you can go down the list of issues and there's positions, but the Canadian posture is always, I don't want to negotiate against myself. Well, you just got 50% tariffs.
MP Bains.
Yeah, I'll just pick up a little bit on that. I think the question was about the opportunity. We have to look beyond. To steal a line from the Prime Minister, we can only control what we can control, and we need to continue to do the things that we need to make sure that the investments that we're making are not just announced, but shovels in the ground, getting these things built. So like we talked about having the port expansion in Metro Vancouver Port. My community, it touches on 16 different communities. That means when we talk about making the investment into supply chain corridors, if it's the billions that we're announcing, we need to have the political will between all levels of government to get those things done and make sure that we keep advancing those initiatives. If we look at a commitment to do non-US global exports, expanding those by 50%, we're already seeing the results of that with the new agreements that we're making. We've seen in 1 year from 24 to 2025, a $33 billion growth in global exports that are non-US. So we need to keep fighting towards those things. But I agree with of course, the folks that are here that are, from the actual tree to, going through the process of getting it finished to becoming another product and how that's being hit on the day-to-day. It is premature probably for us to talk about, okay, what on day one here with the 30 days left on these new tariffs, we need to sort of look at what the provisions are in there first. And I think many of the members here outlined it, looked already at it and are following it probably very closely because of the impact on its businesses. But we have people at the table. Do we need to get more aggressive or discuss on what kind of things that is this an invitation to getting a deal? Of course, I think that is a key piece of what we need to be doing right now for sure. And so I think those are my comments there.
Jason's going to have the last word on this question, and then we're going to we're going to go on. The next question is for Brock. The forestry economic system overview was fascinating. How do we educate politicians? That's a funny question. And the public about these positive impacts of the forestry trade between our countries.
Thanks. And the fun thing is I can see the monitor here who asked the questions. This is from my colleague, Nicole. So good job, Nicole, for getting me some time. Nicole doesn't report to me, but usually only folks who report to me describe my explanations as fascinating. So this is double bonus points. This is an interesting question. I think particularly in the climate of like fear and uncertainty that we see, I think it's really challenging to kind of have those educational conversations. And just a bit of an anecdote. So I was speaking with a member, and this was kind of early days of some of the tariffs and duties hitting. And they had flipped their market for pulp from 80% into the US and 20% to China to exactly the opposite way around, 80% to China and 20% to the US. And I said to them, why is that? And they said, it's because our US consumers who are making, a finished product to export around the world are losing customers right, left, and center all over the world. They had a European buyer of the product that goes through the US mill come in and rip up a 40-year, relationship and say, we're out. And so I said, like, and they're not, your customer in the US who's losing that business isn't screaming. And they said, no, they're too scared. And that's the one thing that I find a little bit perplexing, and that even if you're suffering, you're too scared to say anything. And that, I think that makes the educational conversation so challenging when that's the climate.
Excellent. Thank you. This question is for Jason. When can I, as a farmer, send my wheat to Canada without it being classified as feed grade?
Yeah, that's a great question. And
Do you want to provide a little context for everyone that's not a farmer, perhaps?
yeah, okay. So in Canada, certain seeds are recognized. They're registered seeds to be used in Canada. And if you are going to be importing something into Canada that isn't recognized, isn't registered, then it's automatically imported as feed. So the price of feed. So actually, our premier was down speaking with the governor of Montana last year at some point, and that was one of the questions. So that was some information that we gave her, a briefing note, because that was a concern of Montana's governor. And basically, we can, I can put the blame on the feds. I mean, that's a federal regulation in Canada. So we were as provinces. We just came back last week. I was in Halifax for the federal, provincial, territorial meetings. So all the deputies and ministers across Canada and the territories meeting with the federal government. We met with CFIA. We met with PRD, which was formerly the PMRA, Pest Management Regulatory Agency. They regulate a lot of the products, the insecticides, the herbicides. CFIA they regulate a lot of what we can import and export. So we are actively. I can't give you a timeline, Carol, that asked the question, but definitely, we are working on a number of regulatory changes so that we can mirror what they're doing in the U.S. So the U.S. Environment Agency and the regulators down there. Why should we have to go up here in Canada, go through a whole bunch of process to prove that these products are usable? They're productive, they're good for the environment, they're all this and all that, when it's already been done in the U.S. So we're really trying to push, like, it's almost that automatic yes. And through the former PMRA, it's like, if you can use a product in the U.S. and it's fully recognized, it's licensed, why can't we do it up here? Why are we charging that company all of that money to come up here and go through the same process to register it when it's already in the U.S.? So there's a number of things that we're working on through the federal regulators to get that, to get more of that level playing field.
Dan also has a colleague in the room, because this question is, Dan made a good point at lunch that if a single company,
Chris, you need to ask the question. He's one of my guys here too. Ask me on this.
that if a single company operates in Canada and in the United States and simply moves its product across the border, seems like tariffs shouldn't apply. Is it possible that this strategy or idea will gain any traction to avoid tariffs?
Well, I think yes, and there's evidence this afternoon of that, actually. So the idea here is, and I said earlier today, we're so focused on the irritants in the relationship. And it really is a small list between Canada and the United States, certainly compared to US, Mexico, which is 48 issues we're negotiating at the tables on. And our list with Europe is much longer. And let's not even get started with People's Republic of China. Right. So we have a narrow list, but it covers a lot of the economy. Our friends at the University of Calgary, and I don't want to get into that whole University of Calgary, University of Alberta thing. I know I'm in Edmonton. I don't want that smoke. But the University of Calgary, and I saw Alex Giordano here, have done some analysis of how the tariffs are impacting particular provinces. And it's certainly hitting the East right now. So steel and aluminum, autos, et cetera. So I don't want to dismiss the pain. I grew up in a steel town in Youngstown, Ohio, that's been decimated over the years. So I know what happens when your steel mill gets hit. Lordstown General Motors, when it closed, I know what happens. Okay, that's my family, that's my livelihood growing up. But on the flip side, where there is a positive set, are some of the things we heard today. The lonely potato that becomes a French fry. the barrel of crude that gets processed in the United States and refined by the same company, right? And the idea here, and we just saw it today in aluminum. So tariffs that were on some aluminum companies, if you have operations in the United States, your tariff has just got reduced because that fits the mandate of what the Trump administration is trying to do, which is encourage that investment in the United States. So what we should be looking at are the stories, some of which you've heard on this panel and throughout Penware. Where are those sectors that are beyond trade 2.0, trade 21st century, that are fully integrated, where we can say, this doesn't fit the model anymore. And we've invested in the United States, and you can see what's coming. Critical minerals will be the future of that. Where the production's going to go, the mining is going to be somewhere, and the processing will likely be in one of the other countries. It'll be, and pick your areas. There's a lot of ag like that, and it's mostly stuff coming out of the ground because you can't change that. We can't change where the potato is. And then I was on the Hill recently for USMCA with the national pork producers, and there's the whole pork supply chain where the piglet's grown in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and it's raised.
We call them bacon seeds.
And I love that. Like the only problem is showing the end of that supply chain is not something you want to see before lunch, right? So we don't usually describe that one because it's in a slaughterhouse, right? So the reality is, but there are these things, and I think we've actually seen this evidence. And so that's what, when I was in private practice, we would tell all of our clients is don't go into the administration saying the only place I can get that from is China, so give me an exemption. Say the only place I can get that from is here. I'm willing to pay a little bit more for it if we make it here, but I need 18 months, 2 years to build that facility here or to set up a supplier here. Like, that's the message. And you have to understand that that's the objective. And at the end of the day, for a Canada-US company, there's no win or loss there. Everybody wins in that scenario because it's coming out of the ground on one side and it's refined on the other by the same related entity. And so I think this will get some steam, but it's just we've been so focused on the other stuff. But this is where we should be making our pitch.
Can confirm that the Alberta government shares Dan's opinion on this and is a joint ally in trying to make this argument to USTR and others. Jason, and then we're going to ask the question on why we should make a deal. So if you guys want to add input, feel free to prepare yourself.
Sure, and just to build on his comments a little bit, we're working with some U.S. companies that have set up shop in Alberta. We are trying to attract a lot of value added, so we're not exporting raw product, importing the value added product back in. But a lot of those companies are U.S. companies. So when we've met with the USDA, we've met with the USTR, the Canadian negotiators, it's kind of that same message is don't, there's an old saying, don't get off your horse to fight the pigs. Just, keep going, keep doing what you're doing. And it'll work itself out. And we did see when they brought the tariffs in, that for those 3 days or whatever it was, then it got reversed. Like, it's just, I really feel it's that tactic, and let's see what the market says. Let's push somebody's buttons and see what comments we can cause. What chaos can we cause to get our way? And when we're working with these U.S. companies, they want to crush canola up here. They want to, either bring that biofuel or that canola oil back into the U.S. to make the biofuels, to make their diesel products. And the same thing goes back to my original comment about it's that market, it's that movement of commerce depending on the dollar, depending on the issues, political issues, depending on transportation. There's a lot of factors that these companies take into account which way they're moving the product and how they're moving and how much.
Why should Canada reach a deal? Will the U.S. honor any agreement when a new irritant appears? And I'm going to go to Paul, and then Brock, and then MP Bains. Good.
Thank you. I think it's hard to get, it's easy to get lost with a lot of noise right now, but we also do have to look at it more broadly and see that NAFTA, USMCA, and CUSMA has been one of the most successful trade agreements that exists in the world. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and whether exactly when and how the deal would be reached will be in the federal government's both border to reach. But it's something that I think ultimately we know that we are good partners. We need U.S. and Canada to work well together, and that is why we're here in Penmore, and that is why work like here and the organization like Penmore is so important to ensure that we can reach goal ultimately where we have a free trade entirely between the borders. I think that's a good goal to have. And, you know, until then, from the provincial sort of perspective, we are really proud and fortunate to be a province where we share a border with 7 different province and states. And of course, we have Pacific Ocean, Pacific coast there as well. And we're really focusing on building an infrastructure like our ports and in Vancouver, of course, but also Port Rupert, where we're expanding infrastructure for trade so that we can benefit not just our province, not just our country, but the whole North America. I think it's important for us to make sure that we work as a team, North America, and ensure that we can be more competitive together and thrive together.
Parm. So in the forest industry, we did have a deal from 2005 to 2017, 16, 17. There was, of course, some lawyering and hissing and spitting back and forth during the tenure of that deal, but really both sides adhered to it. Industries in both countries grew. There was lots and lots of investment into the U.S. forest industry by Canadian forest companies, and there was lots of investment into the Canadian forest industry by Canadian forest companies. And we also built a heck of a lot of houses for people on both sides of the border. And the Western Stars and USNRs and Kenworths, they did really well during that time too. So I think that we see that there's a path to a deal that works for both sides. That was not a complete free trade deal. There were some trade barriers, what we call managed trade. So I think that in our industry, we've proven that there's a path that those things can work and that both sides do honor them. So I think there's good evidence for the case to make a deal.
Yeah, and I'll just pick up from there. Look, in order to fuel the growth for both countries, we do need to make this deal, and it's so integrated. It's not something that we can walk away from and say, okay, we don't need each other. If you look at, it was mentioned earlier, Boeing. Boeing's been in my city for 100 years. And we look at the industrial machinery that's going back and forth between our British Columbia and not only in Washington State, but Oregon and others. They're making net benefit from that work that goes by both ways. So the counterproductive measures with the tariffs on, say, aluminum and things that we're building, we're also building America's icebergs, 6 of those right in Vancouver shipyard. So there's a lot of work, jobs, and families that are being impacted. And I think if we look at what we really want to do as nations to move forward and grow, we need to do it together. So I think the key piece to all of this is if we don't get an agreement, it doesn't mean that any nation's going to do any better. I don't think the U.S. will do better because they're not getting to this agreement, and we're not doing better if we don't get to this agreement.
Just within the scope of what we're talking about here is these trade deals. If you look at the other countries that have made deals with the United States, Europe, Japan, Korea, right? As soon as they kind of made a deal that with President Trump, that as far as the United States can put tariffs on you, but you're not going to reciprocate and put tariffs on us, which doesn't seem terribly fair from any other country other than the United States. They haven't pushed further than that, right? So once the deal's been made, it's been done, and I think you can kind of look at other countries as an example about whether or not once a deal's been cut, whether it's going to be completed or not. I think the next question, of course, is that the next administration that comes along, what will happen to these deals, and I think that's still something that we have to see.
Excellent. Penmore is an organization with a long history of advocacy on both sides of the border for fair and open trade policy. How can all of us, both elected and private sector partners work together to advocate for more open borders that have proven to contribute to shared prosperity in the Pacific Northwest? And can we make a difference in renewing the USMCA and reducing tariffs?
I would start with eliminating the phrase open borders from the question, right? I mean, that's just not going to sell. And I think that's part of the understanding where we're talking past each other, is understanding the language that we're using. The United States has absolutely no interest in the concept of an open border, right? On the movement of people and frankly on the movement of goods at this point. So, but understanding that goods that are made in North America being able to move with reliability and preferential treatment may be an understanding there. So I think we have to understand, I'll give you an example. When we were recently with Ambassador Greer, it was kind of, we know what he says. We know him a long time and everything. And I think others in the room have as well. I knew him in private practice. But he used a new line. He said, you know what? And I think he was trying to explain the 51st state thing, but he didn't go this far. But he said, look, our first trade deal in the United States was in 1789, and it was the United States Constitution, when we created a free trade agreement between our states, which I always tease our Canadian friends. We were doing free interstate trade, interprovincial trade since 1789. So you got some catch up to do a little bit. But I think that the idea there was, that's our open market. And if you want access to the US consumer, you have to play by the same rules as US states do with each other, meaning you have to have tariffs on China. You have to take on forced labor. You have to do all of these other things, and realizing that the environment that we were in before is not coming back. And it's not coming back out of nostalgia. We can't build a future based on memories. We have to build it on the moment we're in. And the moment we're in is the trajectory that we were on prior to 2018 was a world that our supply chains were overly reliant on non-market economies. And while we all pine and wish for the days of free and open trade and open these things, if you play out where we were headed, it wasn't looking good. And I think we got a crash course in that during COVID, right? The problem is now we've taken another remedy and we have to calibrate. And I'll just end in saying it was a perfect segue between this panel and the one right before, because the time we're in reminds me exactly of where we were after 9/11. And I'm not talking about the period of Broadway musicals where Canada and the US worked together on 9/11 and 9/12, 9/13. I'm talking about the period of time that came after, where quite frankly, the US and Canada didn't get along very well, largely because of Iraq. And it was Pete Penwer, it was Deborah Myers who was here at Homeland Security, it was Andrea Van Voot in the back in the Harper government doing Beyond the Border, Lori Troutman and others that said, we need to come up and figure out a way to do our border. Because the US position is exactly as it was now. America first, we're doing it alone. You're either with us or you're against us on the border. We don't trust Canada to secure their borders, et cetera, et cetera. And then what we did for about 4 or 5 years, Canada and the United States developed separate programs for our trade and for our tourism, and entirely different programs. They were related, but CBSA did their thing. It wasn't called CBSA then, but we each did our own. And then it took us 10 years to stitch those back together. That's exactly the trajectory we're on right now. With trade diversification, Canada's going to start doing its own thing because the politics doesn't allow it to happen up here. The US is going to, if this doesn't come together soon, going to bypass Canada and have its trade deals with the rest of the world. But the geographic and all the things we've talked about here, the reality is it's going to bring us back together, but we will have lost a decade. And the challenge is this time, we don't have that long. The competition and the technology is moving too fast. So we had maybe that the last time around, but in this environment, trade environment, economic environment, security environment, we don't have that kind of time. So I would just urge all of the elected officials here, it's going to be the hardest thing you have to do to not react to him. It's the hardest thing as an elected official. But remember, you're making a deal with the United States of America, not President Trump. And those are two different things. And I realize that's hard to get over, particularly when he's out on True Social every day, right? But you are making a deal with the United States of America, and that has a longevity and durability that extends beyond any administration.
If I can add briefly, and I promised at the beginning to say little, I can no longer restrain myself. Um, from the Alberta government's perspective, there's no more effective voice in reaching into the administration and members of Congress at all levels of government than Americans themselves advocating on behalf of this trade relationship. My colleagues can go to the administration and others and make great arguments about how this deal helps save American jobs, make things more affordable for Americans. And every time you do it, whether you're an elected official or and particularly in industry, every time you do it, it is exponentially more effective than than we go advocating on behalf of our position. Both are important, but from our perspective, we encourage you to do that as much as possible, and we would love to partner with you while you do that as well, if possible. But Adam had some remarks.
Yeah, I just think this is a great opportunity to think about what does your provinces want in Canada from the United States? Like what are your priorities? What do you got? What are you looking to what do you want to sell to the United States, or what are other initiatives that have been real sticking points in the past that you really want? Because of course the United States wants, they want to address these issues with the automotive industry and otherwise, right? But the biggest one, the biggest issue that the United States wants to address, and which was beginning the IEEPA tariffs, President Trump talked about this, was reducing trade deficits, right, with the United States. So if there are opportunities for people in your provinces to go and to buy U.S. products versus from somewhere else, that's a great opportunity to go into to kind of to steer things in the right direction in that regard. But again, this is a great time if there's going to have to be to get to the bottom of this, they're going to have to be some concessions made at some point, right? So if you're going to give concessions, what do you want, right? What do you want? If you're going to give something, what are you going to get, right? And what can you go and communicate to your constituents that we actually, we achieve for our province, or we achieve for our city, right? What did we get by giving up these other things? And I think that again, at the bottom line here is the private industry in general is looking for, just like Canadians in general, looking for consistency, looking for predictability. And the kind of the chaos that's going on right now is not great for business, right? So we want to cut through that, have things negotiated as quickly as possible. So I think anyway, that would just be my guidance or my advice.
Anybody else want to provide advice on? Go ahead, please, Paul.
Just want to quickly highlight the work that Penwar is doing in that regard, and how I find out that more and more as I'm involved, how Pacific Northwest region, both sides of the border, share so much in common. When I speak to my US counterparts, and we are absolutely surprised, like, oh, you have that issue too. We have that as well. One of the big thing is we both feel in the West Coast, given that both of our countries, federal governments are located in the East Coast, sometimes we feel a little neglected for the needs that we have here.
Welcome to the team.
Exactly, right? We're fortunate to have MP Parm Bains, who's so engaged and advocating for us at the federal level. But that's where we really seen so much in commonality. And also at the same time, you learn about, okay, we know that what our needs are in West Coast may not be same as East Coast, and learning the difference. And if we can ensure that policy, certain things may not, one size fits all may not work best for us, and having that ability to, as you mentioned, allies on both sides of the border to advocate on each other to our own federal governments, I think that's really effective, and it shows that we're family. And even though there's certain little issues that might come up, I think ultimately we all have the same goal of wanting to work together and ensure that we are highlighting the unique position and advantage we have on the West Coast in the benefit of the whole North America.
Excellent. Thank you. Number one determiner of a good meeting is, does it end early or on time? And I want to do our part to end on time. So I'm going to ask one last question as we only have 9 minutes remaining. And I think this is very interesting. We've spent a lot of time talking about tariffs and USMCA and other issues that are facing both of our economies. And the question comes to us as this: the tariffs are obviously hugely impactful, but they're only part of the challenges that many industries, particularly in the resource development, are facing. Beyond trade diversification, what else should be done to support competitive and resilient economies?
Right off the charge, I think one of the things that we've left behind in Canada, US was the Regulatory Cooperation Council, which had a kind of Sesame Street sounding name, but it was the most important thing that we had going, in my opinion, because we dealt with the at the border issues, but in normal times, non-tariff times, we still have this tyranny of small differences between Canada and the United States. And as we mentioned earlier, even interprovincially as well. And I think the mistake that we made in the RCC is that we tried to look at products that were already established, right? Where a regulatory system had been built around it. And so there's entrenched bureaucracies, you get jurisdiction authority, you get budgets and all those kind of things. I think with technology changing so fast and sectors and products changing, that we should look at what's coming down the pike to avoid the very problem that I said earlier, which is we developed two different regulatory environments. And that is going to be very difficult to do in the political environment we have now. But you do have a Republican administration that believes in cutting regulation, right? And I think you can likely do the same as Prime Minister Carney deals with that. So that would be a conversation I would be having, and looking at that at knocking down state and provincial barriers as well. Old topics, old border, old goods, products are going to be really tough to break down, and just because there's those entrenched bureaucracies. But the new stuff, I said at NCSL last week in Calgary, you were with Nathan, I said, I will know we have done the work when provincial and state legislatures, before they pass a bill, have the Canada-US check. Does anybody ask the Canadians, like, if they're okay with this before this bill passes? Just like a check. Like, anybody go ask, BC or Alberta what they think about this, and vice versa, right? And the Americans, because that's often the way that most Canada-US problems pop up, is it's sins of omission rather than commission, right? It's that you guys pass something domestically, and then all of a sudden the Canadians, ooh, that had a Canadian impact, or vice versa. And those are the things, I think that would be the most important thing we could do on a go forward.
Jason.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's why we have Nathan in Washington. That's why we spend a lot of time as ministers and deputy ministers and staff going around and into the US, meeting with the different associations. It's to build that communication path. It's to build those relationships. So when something does come up, they'll phone and say, hey, look, I mean, I got a couple phone numbers from some, beef guys down in Wyoming. I can phone and say, hey, what do you think about this? But if you don't know anybody, it's hard to pick up the phone. It's a cold call. So it's that relationship building. It's that, it's that allowing that communication to happen both ways. And on the regulatory side, like I was, mentioned on the seed coming up from the US as great. We need to really get out of the way of business. And, as a provincial government, we're talking a lot about that automatic yes, that 200-day approval, or the 120-day approval. Like, there's a number of different things that we need to do. We just, as I mentioned, we're down in Halifax at the federal, provincial, territorial meeting. We had many roundtable discussions on the next policy framework, on, what we need to do as ag ministers and deputy ministers and departments across the country working with the federal government. And the number one answer was regulations. We are over-regulating and underworking everything we do. We have to get out of the road of business, and we have to look at other jurisdictions. What are they doing down east? What are they doing in the US? And mirror that. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, and take some word for it and make our decisions on science-based information, not ideological information. Do what's right for the producers, the processors, and the economy, and it'll continue to grow. That's kind of the point that we continue to make in agriculture.
Now we're gonna see how good of a communicator you are, because under a minute, because MP Bains would also like a minute. So go.
I'll actually be shorter, so just very quickly.
I'll believe that when I see it.
Thank you. Dan's mentioned it. He's articulated it really well on a couple of occasions. It's about alignment, right? When we talk about regulations and we could say regulatory reform and all of these things, I think to help having regulatory alignment across both sides of the border, and then also having the alignment on supply chains, the alignment on a lot of these things will help and keep us resilient in moving forward. So I'll stop there.
Gold star.
Well, there's a silver lining to the cloud for us here in Canada, which is, I think for a time there was an assumption that business, because it was profitable, could put up with unending and layering regulations being layered on top of each other, on top of each other, on top of each other. Government of Alberta, fortunately for our forest industry, doesn't do that. So it's just so we know that I'm not directing it there. But there's been a change in those conversations, and things have gotten better from a regulatory standpoint. So I think we're going to get to a better place, but there's some work to do.
Adam, do you have any comments, a minute or less?
I always have comments. But it's just as far as talking about, how do we go and build competitive and resilient economies? I think that there is so much that Canada and the United States have in common, and there's just there's so many flashpoints. We've talked about these these real flashpoint places where the United States and Canada right now are butting heads. Right. There's just so many, there are external countries that don't wish us well, either one of us, right? We should be looking after each other, building, there are strong reasons to go and to continue this partnership and to stay close. I can tell you, just as an American, this is kind of a sideways joke here, but when President Trump talked about the 51st state as American, I was like, oh, that'd be cool. We like Canadians, right? But like we fully recognize that that's not a desirable situation on the north side of the border. But as Americans, we are very grateful to have you as neighbors. We're very grateful to have you as partners. There's just so many different things that we have in common. There's so many different, even though right now you're having these negotiations that don't feel that way, 100% we are. And I think that the Pacific Northwest, this environment here, everyone in this room, I think is doing a wonderful thing by being here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That brings us to 5:30. Let me conclude by saying thank you so much for being here. You had many things that you could have done in your day, but you chose to be here, and you chose to be part of building a better, more resilient, stronger economy in the Northwest region of both of our countries. And that's not just because you want to see the economy grow. That's because of the important things that means: better jobs, better healthcare, better roads, better communities. And in many ways, you are the community builders who make a difference in each of your respective communities. So thank you for doing that, for being here, and for being a positive influence in each of your regions. Lastly, there's a reception. I believe it's 6 o'clock. That is hosted 6:30. That's hosted by the Government of Alberta at the Queen Elizabeth II building, which is just a short cab ride away from here. I encourage you to join us there. It's a great opportunity. It's a wonderful view. Oh, and we also have a bus that leaves 6:10. And a bunch of other buses. So jump on the bus and come on over. If you don't want to take the bus, it's a short cab ride to the Queen Elizabeth building. There's a great view of the Capitol building. We'd love to host you. We're going to give away a few things that will also be fun. And last but not least, please join me in thanking these guys for taking time to do it. May God bless you. May God bless both Alberta, the United States, and Canada.